that was safe. By the time Marshall finally found a cave up in the frosty mountains that was safe and bear-free, he was on his last legs. Exhaustion and pain had finally kicked in when he first touched the snow, and the large gash he had gotten earlier didn't help. He had done his best to clean it with his tongue, but without proper first aid he wasn't going to last much longer. Lying in the cold, icy floor of the cave, Marshall did his best to get warm by huddling his body into a fetal position. His whimpers echoed among the cave as he lay there hurt, cold, and tired. He had no way of getting out of here, especially with the snowstorm that was outside. It would take all day to get to Jake's without his truck, and he doubted he could survive out there without a way to properly heal himself and stay warm. And worst of all, he had no means of contacting Ryder or the others for help. Even if they were searching for him, they had no way of finding him. He left no clues of where he was going. There was no more denying the one thought in Marshall's mind that made him more scared than he ever had in his entire life. I'm going to die. Frozen tears began to stream down his face as he thought of his upcoming demise. He didn't want to die, but what other option was there? He was going to either starve, freeze, or bleed out. Only a miracle could save him, and with the day Marshall had he doubted any miracles were going to be coming for him. No, it was best to make peace with what time he had left and get ready for his end. I'm going to miss everyone. I'm so sorry, Mom and Dad. I love you. I love you both so much. Ryder, I just wish I could tell you how much you meant to me as an owner and a friend. Rocky, Zuma, Rubble, Sky. All of you were the best friends I ever had. I'm sorry for all the mistakes I made, including this one. Forgive me. And Chase. His mind drifted back to a single day where he showed his dedication to his best friend. He flashed back to 2 pups in a graveyard. A promise between 2 young boys who became brothers in that very moment. I'm sorry I couldn't keep my promise, Chase, thought Marshall as he felt his eyelids grow heavier and heavier. With his vision going darker and darker, he saw a bright figure heading towards him from the edge of the cave. It was tall, and looked to be stretching out its arms. An angel? Come to take me away to puppy heaven? Marshall closed his eyes and accepted his fate as he was lifted from the cold, dark earth and carried into the air. He felt warmth wrap around him as a smile decorated his face. His suffering had finally ended. Chase drove his car like hell itself was behind him. He was sure Sky was telling him to slow down, arguing he was going at dangerous speeds. He didn't care to listen to her or focus on anything else. All he cared about was getting to that crash site and finding Marshall alive or any hint of where he was. He wasn't dead. He refused to believe he was dead. Marshall promised to him that he wouldn't die and put Chase through that feeling of misery and loss again. He knew how much that promise meant to them both, and all he could think about was the day when that promise was made. Aim. Fire. 21 guns fired into the air as taps were played by the trumpeter. Police squads of over a dozen districts, including the small one in Adventure Bay, saluted as the officers slowly took the American flag off of the closed casket. Chase wanted more than anything for them to open it again so he could look at his father one last time, even if it was the stiff image of his face that would never again open its eyes. The flag was folded as 21 other police dogs all held in mourning for their fallen brother. Everyone had told Chase over and over again, his father died a hero, protecting an innocent from a bank robber's gun. Chase didn't want a hero. He wanted his dad back. He was still denying it, even in his heart. His dad was immortal in his eyes. He wasn't supposed to die. Heroes never die, they come back after the day is saved. Always. Dressed in his black tux, he felt his entire body go numb as his father's human partner walked over with the flag in his hands and presented it to Chase. He stared at it for at least a minute, unable to even lift his paws or stop his eyes from crying. Ryder's dad eventually took it and placed it next to Chase, who watched the casket sink lower and lower into the ground until there was a thud. That was it. His father was gone just like his mother. He was alone. At that moment, Chase ran as fast as he could through the cemetery. He ignored the calls of Ryder and everyone out there as they called out his name. He didn't want to listen to them, saying that things would get better. It would never get better. How could it when the last of his parents were dead? Losing his mother was hard, but she died when he was only a few weeks old. All he could remember of her was just the summer smell of her fur. His father had been the only parent in his entire life and now he lost him. Blinded by tears and grief, Chase found himself slipping on a loose root and fell into a pile of mud. He didn't bother getting up, he just lay there and began crying his eyes. He wished he could sink into the earth itself and join his father in eternal sleep. If only to end this pain in his heart. "Daddy," Chase whispered as he closed his eyes, haunted by the peaceful face of his now deceased father. Chase didn't know how long he lay there in the mud, but time meant nothing to him at the moment. The sun was setting, he could tell that much. If anything, he didn't mind just resting here forever. Someone will come looking for me. Maybe bring me back to the lookout. Chase didn't want to go back. Not when so many memories of his father were there. Of course, that begged the question of what he was going to do now. "Chase? Hey, Chase," shouted a voice in the twilight. "Marshall?" thought Chase, ears perking up. He slowly got up from the mud, his clothes a complete wreck, as he saw his best friend emerge from the bushes. Panting like he had been in a 3-hour marathon, Marshall took a moment to gather his breath before he turned to Chase with a relieved smile. "There you are." "Everyone's been worried," shouted Marshall as he rushed over and hugged Chase. Despite Chase not hugging back, Marshall nuzzled his best friend. "Come on, let's head back. Plus, I think my parents are gonna scold me for running off like that to look for you." "Leave me alone, Marshall," hissed Chase as he turned around. "I'm not going back. I want to be alone." Marshall whimpered as he stared at his best friend's back. "Chase." He lowered his head. "I'm sorry you lost your dad. I liked him a lot, we all did. My parents, Ryder, Mr. Ryder, all of those police units there. They loved your dad too, and he was an inspiration to all of them. I understand that, Dash." "Understand," shouted Chase as he tackled Marshall, pinning him to the ground. "You don't understand anything about how I'm feeling, Marshall. You still have a family. My dad was my entire family. With him gone I'm all alone." Chase leaked a few tears before returning to his rage. "I never knew my mom. She died soon after I was born. Dad's always been there for me, and I wanted him to watch me grow up like a police dog, but he can't because some trigger-happy bank robber killed him. Who do I have left, Marshall?" "Who?" "You have me," shouted Marshall, pushing him off, much to Chase's surprise. Getting up, Marshall barked before shouting, "Darn it, Chase. You still have family who loves you. Maybe we're not related by blood, but..." His expression softened as his eyes began to get misty. "You are a brother to me, Chase. And I love you like one." Chase's eye widened as his mouth dropped upon hearing this. "And Marshall." Rubbing his eyes, Marshall continued, "I hate seeing you like this, Chase. I want to help you because your pain is my pain. I may not have been Trigger's son, but he was an uncle to me. We're all hurt by his death, Chase. Maybe it's different from your pain, but we still are sad." He walked over and hugged his stunned best friend. Do you know what puppy heaven is? And no, whispered Chase, although he had heard of it. It's a place where good dogs go when they die. A place of peace and eternal happiness. Your parents are there, happy, and they are looking down at you right now. Watching you, always, said Marshall as he gave Chase a small smile. I had a grandmother who died before I met you, and when she was gone I was sad too. My mother told me that all of us will see her again when we go to puppy heaven, but we have to wait for it to come. We have to live good and happy lives, because that's what they would want us to do. They do? Asked Chase, tearing up at this point. But I miss them so much. How can I move on? By moving on with us together, Chase. If you let us, whispered Marshall. Chase fell on his rump and started to rub his eyes. Do you really want to be my brother? Only if you let me, replied Marshall. Chase thought long and hard about it before he nodded. Okay, but I want you to promise me one thing. Anything, said Marshall, wagging his tail. Don't die before I do. Marshall looked a bit taken back, but Chase continued. I don't care what it takes, but I don't want you to die before I die. I can't go through another loss, Marshall. Please. Marshall was silent for a bit before he smiled. I promise. Cross my heart, hope to die, stick a needle in my eye. Wait, should that be hope not to die in this case? Chase chuckled as a real smile, the first in many days, appeared on his face. Yeah, it would. The two looked at each as they held their paw out and touched each other. Brothers? Asked Chase.
Brothers.
By the time Chase reached the wreck, the fire was all but gone thanks to the ongoing rain. He leaped out of his seat and began barking over and over again. Marshall! Marshall! Shouted Chase as he ran around the area, trying to find even a fur of the spotted Dalmatian. Every time he turned his head, he grew afraid that he would see a dead body somewhere on the ground. He sniffed the air, trying to get a scent of Marshall, but he could barely get anything. The fire had to have burned it away. Thankfully, he didn't smell a decaying corpse. Chase! Shouted Sky's voice as he saw her land nearby on her helicopter. She rushed out, looking both furious and worried. What the heck is wrong with you? You could have gotten yourself killed the way you were driving. I was trying to find Marshall, shouted Chase, defending his actions. Look around you, Chase. Marshall is. Sky began to choke on her words while getting ready to tear up. He's not dead, shouted Chase so loud that even the thunder above was muted by his scream. Marshall is not dead. He wouldn't break his promise. Never. Nostrils flaring, he saw that Sky looked at him with fear and was shivering. Sense came back to him as he shook his head and looked away in shame. I'm sorry, Sky, but he can't be dead. There is no body. No smell of death. And look at the way the truck has crashed, it had to have come from above. Sky did indeed look at the truck, which had landed front first into the earth. Looking up, she saw a cliff right above it. Arf. Wings. Her jetpack opened up from her pup pack and she flew up towards the cliff. Chase watched her fly up as he cursed himself for yelling at her. His father told him the most important thing for a police dog was to remain calm and professional at all times. And I haven't done a very good job of that, have I? Chase felt exhaustion slowly overcome him. Everything that had happened in the last few hours was slowly breaking him, and he didn't know how much more he could take. But I have to keep going. I have to find Marshall. He had to find Marshall, apologize to him, knock him on the head for leaving, and then hug him and say how much he loved his brother. Chase. I found paw tracks. Marshall must have jumped out of his truck before it crashed, shouted Sky's voice on his communicator tag. At that moment, Sky's voice was like that of an angel of hope. Chase barked and replied, "Great work, Sky. I'll be up there in a moment." He turned to his pup pack. Rough. Zip line. The compartment for his zip line opened up and he shot it at the cliff before using it to bring him up. Reaching the top, Chase carefully climbed up until he reached the road where Sky was waiting for him. He saw the tracks and sighed with relief. "He's alive, Sky. He's alive." Sky smiled and nodded. "Then let's keep looking." "Wait," said Chase, making her pause and look at him. Nervously, he rubbed the back of his neck with his paw. I'm sorry, I yelled at you. It was wrong." Sky gave a small smile before walking over to Chase and nuzzling him. "It's okay. You're worried about Marshall. We'll find him, Chase." Chase blushed a bit, but soon reminded himself he was on a mission. Now was not the time to be thinking of such thoughts. He lowered himself to the ground and began to use his nose to follow the scent Marshall's tracks had left. He found himself making for a nearby cave not too far from where they landed. It was dark and very deep, the kind of caves he and Jake sometimes liked to explore on occasion. Rough. Flashlight. His compartment opened and his tool instantly flashed a beam of light into the cave where it fell upon something. Upon seeing what it was, both pups froze at the sight of a large bear, but upon seeing what was in its mouth, Sky screamed. It was Marshall's tag. Bloody and chewed up. The bear roared in fury. Before Chase knew it, he was screaming and charged forward. If it For the first time in his life, Rocky didn't care about getting wet. Not if it meant finding Marshall. "I'd even let him spray me with his water cannons every day if it means seeing him again." When the storm was too much for any of them to handle, Ryder had ordered all pups back to the lookout, much to their disagreement. They all wanted to find Marshall, especially in this storm. Nevertheless, he gave an order and they obeyed. It had shocked them all when Chase told Ryder to pretty much forget it and took off on his own. The very same Chase that always drilled them every day into obeying Ryder's every command. Now they had both Marshall, Chase, and even Sky to worry about. As it appeared, she decided to follow him. Rocky wondered if she did it because she wanted to find Marshall, or because of her feelings for the police pup. Everyone in Adventure Bay knew that Chase and Sky had a thing for each other, but neither of them had the courage to admit it. Still, if there were any two pups who could find Marshall, it was them. The rest could only wait for their return. Zuma constantly paced around the living room while Rubble was focused on the driveway outside, hoping to see or hear a car coming. Rocky had learned the value of patience early at a young age, but he was finding it hard to not just grab his truck and continue the search. Even if meant getting wet. "Waki?" asked Zuma, looking at him with worry. Rocky did his best to smile at the pup. A long time ago, that speech of his annoyed him a bit since he couldn't say his name right. Over time he grew used to it and saw Zuma as the little brother of the team next to Rubble. "Do you think Marshall hates us?" The idea of Marshall and the word hate never once crossed Rocky's mind except for maybe flying. But with the fight earlier in the day playing in his head, he couldn't lie and think that there was some truth in Zuma's question. "I don't know." "I don't blame him," whispered Rubble, looking away from the window. "We said such horrible things to him. Over a stupid show. I don't care how long it takes. I'll make it up to him, I promise," cried out Zuma, rubbing his eyes. "I just want our family back." Rocky walked over and hugged his friend, who began to cry on his shoulders. I'm sure Chase and Sky will bring him back. Everything will be okay. At least, Rocky hoped so. He couldn't help but get a bad feeling in his chest that something bad had happened. Chase's war cry echoed across the cave like a demon unleashing its rage. From the entrance, Sky saw her friend ran towards the bear with bloodlust in his eyes. She knew what it was all about. She had seen the bloody collar and, with it, began to paint the image of an eaten-up corpse. Doing her best to avoid the bile growing in her mouth, she saw Chase slide underneath the charging bear. Turning around, he barked and jumped, biting the bear in the tail. The beast howled with pain as it tried to shake Chase off, but he refused to let go. Using his paws, he pushed himself onto the back and started biting as hard as he could at the neck, his German shepherd's teeth ripping fur and flesh out. Sky didn't know what was scarier, the bear or Chase. She had seen Chase act violent before, mostly against the occasional thief or bully they had to deal with. But this was the first time Chase looked like he was fully willing to kill. Still frozen, Sky watched in horror as the bear finally got wise and made for the wall of his cave. Turning around, he slammed his back against the rocky surface. Chase cried out in pain before slipping down, dazed and bleeding around his ears. Seeing his attacker down, the bear got up and opened its jaws. Chase, shouted Ski, before turning to her pup pack. She may have lost one friend, but she wasn't about to lose another. Arf. Arf. Wings. Once her wings came out, Sky flew as fast as she could towards the bear. Normally, she wouldn't dare attempt to do this in such a narrow space as a cave, but it was better than losing 2 pups in one day. The bear's attention was caught as Sky began to zip around the bear, barking at it. It roared and tried to swipe at her with his claws, but she was much too nimble for it. Getting an idea, she headed towards the exit of the cave while shouting, "Come and get me, you overgrown teddy bear." The bear roared in anger and chased after her, reaching the edge of the cliff path that led to a long way down. Sky took to the air even higher as the bear continued to roar at her. "Hey!" shouted a voice, catching the bear's attention. It turned around and saw Chase, back on his 4 paws, growling at the bear. Bark. Net. His net launcher emerged from the pup pack and fired, the net wrapping around the muzzle and face of the bear. Blinded and unable to roar, it leaned on its hind legs in confusion while swiping in the air. "This is for my brother, you murderer," shouted Chase as he charged forward. With a loud cry, he tackled the bear right in the chest. Sky watched with bated breath as the force of the blow pushed the bear off the edge of the cliff, hurling it into the dark chasm below. Sky didn't stop watching the falling bear until she could see it no more and turned away, trying not to visualize the gory fate. Instead, she focused on Chase, who looked at the location of where the bear fell while taking deep breaths. He then quickly turned back into the cave. Landing back on the ground, Sky retracted her wings and headed forward, eyeing a large puddle of blood that smelled just like. "No, no, please." Sky rushed in, but paused upon seeing a sight that shattered her heart. Chase held Marshall's blood-covered collar that was starting to mix with the tears that were falling from his eyes. Slowly, he looked up at Sky with a pleading face. "Please tell me." "Tell you what?" asked Sky, who started to feel her own waterworks coming out. "Tell me this is a dream, tell me this isn't real, and that when I wake up Marshall will be in his doghouse, washing it, and then tripping on his hose and spraying Rocky again. And we all just laugh, because that's Marshall being Marshall," whispered Chase as he lowered his head. "Please, Sky, tell me he's not dead." Sky slowly walked over to Chase and nuzzled him, holding him closer to her as she felt the collar between both their chests. "Chase. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." She closed her eyes as she felt him breath heavier and heavier, hyperventilating worse with each breath. Until at last, he unleashed it all in a painful scream. Oyeg. Chase fell to the floor, cradling the collar as he openly bawled. Mud, tears, and rain decorated his defeated face as he screamed, "He promised. He promised. Oh. Marshall. Marshall. Please don't leave me. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for everything. You're not an annoyance, you're my brother. Don't leave like Dad did. Please. I love you. Please. I love you. Please, please, please. Marshall, please." Never before had Chase looked so broken in the eyes of Skye. The once strong and capable leader that she always admired, even before her feeling for him, left her speechless. It was like looking at a little newborn, alone and scared in a world of nothing but darkness. His sorrowful cries rang even in Skye's soul as she lay her head over his and cried with him. Nothing she said could heal this. She wasn't sure if anything could heal this. Marshall, her comrade, her friend, was gone forever and nothing would ever be the same. Paw Patrol would never be the same. "I need to call Ryder," whispered Skye, figuring he and the rest of the pups deserved to hear the news. Chase didn't say anything, he just whimpered. Pressing her communicator tag, she called for her owner. "Skye? Thank goodness. What happened? Are you and Chase safe?" cried out Ryder on the other end. "Our Ryder," whispered Skye, trying to find the words. "Skye? And Marshall's dead." Another cry exited Chase as Skye winced. The other line was quiet as Skye waited. "Aryys sure? Is there a body?" asked Ryder, his voice cracked. "We found his collar, and his blood, in a bear's cave," said Skye, trying to not imagine the grim final moments of the Dalmatian's short life. All she could hope was that he didn't suffer long and was at peace. There was a long silence, only broken up by Chase's crying. Finally, Ryder said, "Are you safe?" "We are. When the storm ends, come home." "Ryder. I'm sorry. It's all our fault, if we hadn't." "Skye, just don't blame yourselves, please." Skye swore that before the call ended, she heard a heartbroken cry. Ryder looked at the pup pad in his hands as tears from his eyes dripped down on the screen. Marshall was gone. One of his pups was gone. He failed. He failed Marshall and the rest of the team. A part of him wanted to throw his pup pad to the floor, head downstairs, and scream at the others for what they had done. It was their fault Marshall ran away. It was their fault he died. It was their fault they couldn't save him. But as much as Ryder wanted to do that, he couldn't. He loved his pups. All of them were important, even when they made a mistake. They never meant to have Marshall leave on purpose, nor did they want him dead. He saw the regret in their eyes, and this new news would destroy them. He never would wish this on anyone, to lose someone that they cared about so much. He didn't even know what he was going to tell Blaze and Misty. They trusted him to look after Marshall, but he let them down. He let their only son die. Not in the face of duty, but in the cold and harsh forest where he had been devoured by a bear. Ryder knew there was always danger when he stared Paw Patrol. His father even lost 3 different pups in rescue rovers before replacing them. Ryder swore that would never happen with Paw Patrol, but that promise was now broken. They were more than a team, they were a family. This was even truer for Rocky, Zuma, and Rubble, who didn't have parents like Marshall or Skye or Chase. And now they had to mourn the loss of one of their own. Skye sounded all broken up, but he could also hear the whimpering cries of Chase. Marshall had been one of the key rocks for the police pup after Trigger had died in the line of duty. And now that he had lost another important figure in his life, what was that going to do to Chase mentally? He didn't know how the other pups would take it. Still, it was best to tell them now, as delaying would help no one. Taking the elevator down, Ryder watched as all zoomed towards him with anticipation. "Did they find him?" asked Zuma. "Is he okay?" asked Rocky. He looked at all three of them while clenching his fist. He knew once he told them the truth, nothing would ever be the same for all of them again. "I'm sorry, pups, but we found Marshall's tag with a lot of blood on it, in a bear's cave." Their eyes widened with horror. "Because of this, Marshall has been declared deceased." "No," shouted Rubble as he ran away, right outside. Ryder knew where he was going. Whenever Rubble got upset, he locked himself in his doghouse and refused to come out. He didn't blame Rubble. In fact, Ryder himself wanted to lock himself in his room and just cry. I can't believe it," muttered Rocky, tears in his eyes. "Not Marshall. Tell me they at least found his body." Ryder shook his head as Rocky began to weep. Marshall. I'm so sorry. I don't know if you can hear me up there, but I am so sorry." "Www whispered Zuma, whose lip as trembling as his eyes began to water. You said he'd be all right." Rocky shook his head and looked at Zuma. I'm sorry. It's not fair, screamed Zuma as he dived into Rocky's arms. Wawa. Marshall. Ryder turned away. He just went back to elevator and rode it all the way up. He could still hear Zuma's wails. He couldn't do this. He needed help. He turned on his pup pad and called for his father. A few rings later, he saw his dad ready to greet him, but showed concern when he saw his son crying. "Ryder? What happened?" "Dee Dad," whimpered Ryder as he fell to his knees. I lost a friend." His grandfather cut for all of Adventure Bay had turned out for the memorial at the lookout. It had been decorated with black, white, and red banners with the Paw Patrol logo temporarily covered with a flag of Marshall's fire pup tag. The entire town, dressed for the occasion, had come together for this tragic event, even a few outsiders of Adventure Bay. Mr. Porter had been comforting his grandson, Alex, the entire time as he cried on his grandfather's shoulders. Captain Turbot had his hat off, placing it over his heart as a sign of respect, while the other hand used a tissue to dry his tears. Farmer Yumi and Al held hands as they muttered in prayer. Fuzzy and his flock were nearby as well, the little goose being held by his mother as he tried furiously to fly to the memorial statue in tears. Ryder, who had been crying silently, had his father holding his shoulder for support while Katie was on the other side holding his hand. The pet groomer gave him a comforting smile, letting him know that she was there for him. Even Callie was there, in a black collar and looking somber. The saddest ones, besides Ryder, were two other groups, the pups themselves and Marshall's parents. All of the pups had dressed up in their Paw Patrol uniforms, but with a black scarf wrapped around their necks as a sign of mourning. Words couldn't describe the looks on their faces that combined guilt, shame, and sorrow into one heartbreaking emotion. None of them had any tears that flowed out, nor did they ever stop looking at the giant memorial statue of Marshall, which featured Hamed standing proud for all to see. The marble statue had a golden plate that read, "In loving memory of Marshall. A proud fire pup of Paw Patrol." Just do my best. Forget the rest. The only ones missing was Everest and her owner Jake. They tried to get a signal, but it was jammed by the storms. Ryder could only think how devastated they would be once they learned of Marshall's fate. Mayor Goodway walked up to a small podium, wearing a funeral dress and shawl. Clearing her throat, she said, "We are all gathered here today in remembrance one of Adventure Bay's greatest heroes. He was brave, kind, and a faithful to us all. Marshall of Paw Patrol was not just another dog, he was part of our community, our family. He was a rescuer, a friend, and a son to us." She turned to the weeping parents and their fire team who had come to support their dogs. Blaze was comforting his sobbing wife, who held on to a picture of Marshall that was shot not long after he was born. Nobody knew what to say to the two dogs who had lost their only son. If anything, the Paw Patrol wished they were hated by them instead of forgiven. They told them everything. How it was all their fault that their son ran away and met his death. They looked at the five long and hard as they awaited their punishment. In the end, they sighed and forgave them. They said Marshall would want them to, and they knew the pups never really meant for this to happen. It still didn't stop them from blaming themselves. They even offered to surrender their dog tags and shame to Ryder, offering to be sent away to new owners, but Ryder outright refused. They were a family, and Marshall wouldn't want them to split up. "Even if I did say that though, that doesn't mean we won't have this hanging over us for the rest of our lives," thought Ryder as the mayor ended her speech and gave the floor to Ryder. Ryder squeezed Katie's hand before walking up to the podium. He stared at the crowd for a bit before closing his eyes and taking a deep breath. Marshall was. I guess it's hard to say what he was. Brave? Gentle? Happy? I think about that with all my pups. But the one thing I think about most when it comes to Marshall, from now and forever, will be his love." He opened his eyes and smiled. With Marshall, he loved everything and everyone. He loved life to the fullest and made sure to smile every day, showing how much he loved who he was and what he was doing. His love was something we all felt in our hearts when we were with him. He had a presence that made you think he was the rays of sunshine itself. He clenched his fist. It's true that, it may seem like those rays are gone. However, I think if we remember who Marshall was, and that feeling of love we associated with him, then we can still feel those rays as he watches us from below. Ryder lowered his head and turned away. He didn't want to see the reactions of his speech. He just wanted to look at the statue of Marshall. "I'm gonna miss you, buddy. If there is a heaven for dogs, you deserve it." Ryder sighed before walking over to his father and Katie. He hugged both before turning back to the memorial. Getting the signal from the mayor, a bagpipe player began to blow into his instrument as Rubble walked forward with Chase, Zuma, Sky, and Rocky carrying a small casket on their shoulders. There was no body to bury, so they placed Marshall's dog tag in the casket along with a photo of him. Rubble, using his shovel, dug the hole in front of the statue and allowed the others to slowly lower the casket into the grave before he sealed it up with the dirt. When the last of the dirt was patted, the bagpipes ended and the crowd began to walk away. There would be no reception, just some time alone to deal with this new reality they were in. Everyone eventually made their way to the lookout, except for Chase, who stood there and stared at the statue with an emotionless face. Sky looked back at him for a bit before following the others inside. The first thing Marshall felt as he slowly began to come into consciousness was the warm wrappings around him. He didn't feel any pain, nor did he feel cold. He tried to remember the last thing he saw, and soon it all came back to him. Running away. The bear. The cold. His final moments. Did I die? He slowly opened his eyes, but didn't see puffy clouds or rays of unearthly light. Rather a warm cottage bedroom where he was under the covers of a warm bed. Not what I expected heaven to look like. "Marshall. You're awake," shouted a familiar voice as Marshall nearly gasped upon seeing Everest jumped onto the bed, wagging her tail. She proceeded to lick him a few times before she stopped and blushed. Sorry about that. Everett? You're in puppy heaven too? Asked Marshall in shock. Everest giggled. I'm not dead. Neither are you. Me and Jake found you in a cave 3 days ago and brought you back here. I'm not dead, whispered Marshall as a smile began to grow on his face. He was about to jump up with joy, but he hissed and touched his wound, which was now bandaged up. Careful, you're still not fully healed, said Everest, forcing him back on his pillow. You were really weak when we found you. You gotta take it easy. Marshall nodded. Thanks, Everest. I owe you my life. No problem. I'm just glad we rescued you. Arf, said the husky with a smile. She then frowned before asking, Hey, Marshall? Why did you run away? Ryder and the pups were really worried about you. They were? Asked Marshall in shock. Ryder he could understand, but didn't the pups hate him? Yeah, Ryder had them looking all day when we last had contact. Rocky seemed to be really upset, said it was his and the other pups' fault and they wanted to apologize or something, said Everest. Oh really? Asked Marshall as a tear dropped down from his eye. They were looking for me? Where are they now? We don't know. My communicator tag isn't able to transmit due to the snowstorm outside. We haven't had outside contact in 3 days. You're lucky we decided to search for an extra hour before having to turn in because of the intensity, explained Everest. Marshall sighed and cursed the weather. More than anything he wanted to see his friends again and go home where he belonged. Will the snowstorm be leaving soon, Everest? Should be gone in a few hours, dude, said Jake as he entered the room with 2 hot cups. Glad to see you back from dreamland, Marshall. For a second we thought you weren't gonna make it. Everest here didn't even move from your bed for a whole day. Jake, hissed Everest in embarrassment, which made the boys laugh. Jake handed over Marshall a cup of hot tea, which the pup eagerly accepted. When he tasted it, however, he nearly gagged. Liver flavored. Oops, that's mine. Everest took the cup and began to sip it. Good. Accepting a warm regular green tea, Marshall felt his inner body light up as he drank the tea. Jake put the tray away before he asked, So Marshall, why did you decide to skip down and head into the woods on your own? Blushing, Marshall rubbed his paws and whispered, Actually, I was trying to get here. I wanted to live with you guys for a while. Why? I mean, not that I'm happy that you'd want to hang out here for a bit, dude, but why leave your friends? Marshall explained how that day started with him messing up everyone's day, and the big fight that he had with the other pups when he broke the TV. He talked about how he ran away, and all the bad stuff that happened along the way, including the crash and the bear. Everest gasped and hugged Marshall, sobbing after he explained how he had given up and was ready to die until they saved him. You should really thank Everest. She picked up your tracks and we found you in that cave, said Jake with a rare serious look. If we didn't find you, dude, I'm afraid you'd be cold and gone. Yeah, whispered Marshall, shivering at the fact that he was so close to death's cold touch and narrowly escaped it. He turned to a teary-eyed Everest and gave her a warm smile. I really owe you, Everest. Thanks. Silly, pup, chuckled Everest, blushing tea as she wiped away her tears. But Marshall, I don't think your friends hate you. Rocky looked really worried and scared for you when I saw him. I'm willing to bet all my liver treats that every one of the pups were hoping to find you and apologize. Oh really? You think that? Asked Marshall, hope filling his heart. I know so, proclaimed Everest. And as soon as the storm clears and we get a signal, we'll be able to get in contact with Ryder and the others. Marshall nodded as he couldn't help but wonder what the other pups were doing right now. It's been 3 days. I wonder if they're still looking for me. Chase still hadn't moved, and it had been 2 hours. Sky felt like she was watching 2 statues at the same time. After the service, nobody was in the mood to do much. Ryder was with Katie and his dad up on the 2nd floor. Rubble and Zuma were watching old videos of Marshall on the new TV they had. And Rocky was getting water for Marshall's parents, who were silent in the corner like their world had come to an end. It might as well be the end of the world, thought Sky as she thought about the future. With Marshall gone, who would be their fire pup? Would they get a replacement? The thought of someone taking over Marshall's spot invoked both fear and fury in her. No one would be able to replace Marshall. Ever. Worried about her crush, she decided to take a chance and exited the lookout. Walking up to Chase, who continued to stand there and look at the statue, she sat beside him without saying a word. Marshall would have loved it, said Chase, without looking at Sky. A sad smile appeared on his lip. Although, really it should be of him doing one of his silly acts. It seems more like him. Yeah, said Sky, lowering her head. What I wouldn't give for one of those acts. I'm leaving Paw Patrol, muttered Chase, closing his eyes and whimpering in shame. Sky's eyes opened wide as she could as she turned to face him. What? Why? Because how can I be a good police pup if I can't save my own best friend, whimpered Chase, as he stared back at his best friend's grave. I hurt Marshall. I betrayed him. If it wasn't for me, he wouldn't have run off like that, and got himself killed. I failed him as a best friend, a brother, and as a leader. If I can't help my best friend, or my dad, what good am I? And what about all the people you have saved? All of those civilians who pass by, and thank you for all the hard work you've done, shouted Sky, shoving her face into his. You think you're the only one that feels bad, Chase? We all are responsible. We all said those horrible words. We're all going to live with it for the rest of our lives, but I'm not gonna quit. You do that and Marshall will never forgive you. What do you know? You have a family. I have nobody anymore. My mom, dad, and Marshall are all dead. My mother died giving birth to me. I told my dad to go to work that day instead of spending time with me, and he got shot. I told Marshall he was an annoyance, and he runs away only to be eaten by a bear. I'm a curse, Sky. Everyone I love dies because of me. I should. He began to tear up as he turned away to hide his face. I should just disappear off the face of the earth. That way, none of you will die because of me. Chase. He turned around only to be met with a slap across the face. He held his red cheek before slowly turning to a glaring Sky. Don't ever say that again. Sky, muttered Chase as he fell on his haunches. Don't ever wish such a thing, Chase. I lost one friend I cared about, I don't want to lose another. I don't want to lose you. Out of everyone here, you're the one I care about the most, whispered Sky, biting her lip. You think you lost those you care about? Ryder lost his mom in an accident. Katie's parents are divorced and refuse to speak to each other. Rocky, Zuma, and Rubble are all orphans for a reason you know. And we all lost Marshall. We all lost a precious friend. Not because of you and you alone. We all played a part in that loss, but maybe it just happened because it did. Chase wiped his eyes as Sky continued. I don't know if losing Marshall will ever heal, but I won't let this stop me from being what I want to be. A rescue pup. If you want to make your father, and Marshall, proud, you will keep doing what you can do to help people and prevent such tragedies from occurring. And remember, she walked up and nuzzled him, making them both blush. We're in this together, especially me with you, because... Chase. She closed her eyes and sighed. I love you. She heard Chase gasp, but a second later he hugged her and began to weep on her shoulders. I love you too. The two of them opened their eyes and looked deep into each other's gaze. Slowly, their muzzles began to inch closer. Suddenly, their communicator links activated at the same time, snapping them out of the moment. The signal was directed to all of them. Hello? Ryder? Pups? You there? It's Everest. Everest? What happened? We tried to communicate with you, but we got static, said Chase, blushing as he and Sky inched a bit closer, their tails wrapping around each other. Sorry about that. The snowstorm just cleared up. Glad we could get a signal. Listen, about Marshall. Both pups whimpered at the name and the thought of their friend learning the sad news. Everest. Marshall's gone, we found his collar and blood, we just had his funeral, said Ryder on his line. To their shock, Everest just giggled. Well, that's where you're wrong, Ryder. I found Marshall. He's alive. Alive, shouted not just Chase and Sky, but Ryder and all the other pups as well. Yep. See for yourself. The visual feed for the communicators came online and soon they saw what looked to be Jake's bedroom from their tags. Sky was sure her heart stopped, as did the others, as they saw a single Dalmatian on the bed, nervously waving. Hey, pups. How was my funeral? Asked Marshall, with a small smile. The moment Everest hung up the call, Marshall felt a flood of emotions overwhelm him. Everyone had been crying, grateful that he was alive. His parents were there, holding each other as they told him they loved him. Ryder's face was the happiest he had ever seen. And then there were the pups. They missed him. They were mourning for him. He thought they didn't want him, but he was wrong. They searched everywhere, even through a storm, to find him. He never heard so many apologies at once, he could still hear them in his head. Marshall wanted nothing more than to leap out of the bed, rush down to Adventure Bay, and hug them all until his front paws fell off. But then he remembered how they hurt him. Yelled at him. His heart began to feel like it was in pain again. He could still remember those harsh words that drove him to do this. But they looked so sorry. He closed his eyes. He wanted to forgive his friends, he really did, but what if this happened again? Could he stay with Paw Patrol? Could he trust them? He had to make sure. Jake. Everest, asked Marshall, getting their attention. Can you do something for me? The moment the call ended, everyone got into their vehicles and rushed off for Jake's mountain, sirens blaring. Chase was pretty sure that everyone in Adventure Bay was confused by this, but that wasn't important. What was important was that Marshall, his brother, was alive. Chase wanted to cry, he probably was, but he was too busy rushing ahead of the rest of the pack as they drove up the mountain. Chase had so many things he wanted to say to Marshall, but most importantly was the apology. He didn't care if Marshall forgave him or not, he just wanted to hug him and tell him how sorry he was. He looked behind him and saw the rest of the Paw Patrol, Ryder's ATV, and his father's truck containing Katie and Marshall's parents. Looking up, he saw his crush, Sky, not too far behind him. He blushed thinking about how they confessed just moments ago and were about to kiss. Are we boyfriend and girlfriend now? He knew they had to have a talk, but only after they had talked to Marshall first. Before he knew it, he reached the main cabin where Jake and Everest lived and was about to rush inside when the said pup and owner stood in front of the door. "Wow, dude. Can't go in there yet. We need to talk." "Jake, you have to let me in. I need to see Marshall," shouted Chase, growling and showing his teeth. Upon seeing her owner threatened, Everest stood up in front of Chase and growled back. He said to wait. "If you actually use your head for a change, you won't do something stupid like you did to Marshall." "What did you say?" "I'm his best friend," shouted Chase. "At least I was a better friend than you six were," shouted Everest. "You don't dash." "Chase. Heel." Ryder's command instantly made him stop and sit down. He slowly turned around and saw how the others were staring at him with either worry or disappointment. Ryder walked up, shaking his head before he put his hand on his dog's head. "I know you want to see Marshall, but yelling at the ones who saved him isn't going to help." Chase whimpered in shame as he looked at Marshall's saviors and bowed. I am sorry." "You're right, Everest. I haven't been a good friend. I helped make this horrible mistake happen. Forgive me?" Everest didn't say anything, but sighed. "I'll forgive you if Marshall does." Which leads us to what we need to talk about. "Marshall wants to talk to you in 3 groups, said Jake, shaking his head. "Dude's been through a lot and wants to get some stuff off his chest." "Does he hate us?" asked Rubble, whimpering. Jake and Everest looked at each other before the former answered, "We don't know. That's up to you guys to find out." The 5 pups sighed and lowered their heads even further. Chase closed his eyes and realized that he might never get Marshall's trust again after what happened. Yet, we deserve it. Our actions caused all this to happen. If Marshall can't forgive me or the other pups, I'll just have to live the burden for the rest of my life. "Who's going first?" asked Ryder's father. "He wants his parents first," said Everest. Without wasting a second, the 2 adult Dalmatians rushed in to see their son, followed by Jake and Everest. Chase whimpered in shame as he looked at Marshall's saviors and bowed. "Mom. Dad," shouted Marshall as he was tackled by his 2 parents. He laughed with joy as they nuzzled, barked, and licked. It made Jake and Everest smile as they watched the family. After the excitement had worn off, the 2 hugged their child with tears dripping down their eyes. Marshall whimpered, but a smile was on his face. I missed you. I thought, when I was going to die. I. What were you thinking, Marshall?" shouted Misty in a tone that made everyone in the room wince. "You almost died out there. How could you do something so stupid as run away from your home? If you were that upset, or needed to be away for a while, you could have told us, and we could have taken you home. Instead, we thought you." With a heartfelt cry, Misty held on to her son as Blaze nuzzled his wife. "When we heard you died, we thought our world had fallen apart. We didn't know what to do. How could we have gone on without our baby boy?" Marshall felt the guilt in his heart stab him again and again like a harpoon. "I didn't mean to make you cry. It was stupid, and I'm sorry. I'll never run away again." "It's okay, Marshall," whispered Blaze as he hugged his son and smiled. "You're safe, thanks to Jake and Everest. That's all that matters." "Yeah, I owe them a lot," whispered Marshall, giving Everest a smile. In fact, he turned around and gave Everest a toothy smile. "Everest, you have my permission to marry my son. Welcome to the family." "What/Dad," shouted both Everest and Marshall, who blushed as images of them in a wedding ceremony entered their heads. Misty rolled her eyes and swatted her laughing husband in the face. "Ignore him. He's being an idiot again. Just trying to lighten the mood." Marshall giggled before sighing. I'm really sorry I ran away. If you want to bring me home as punishment, I understand. Don't you want to stay with Paw Patrol? Asked Blaze. Marshall lowered his gaze. I don't know what if Ryder is upset with me. What about the pups and what they did to me? Blaze put a paw on his son's shoulder. Marshall, your friends were all mourning for you at your funeral just a few hours ago. They regret what they did and showed how much they loved you by looking for you nonstop. Did you know that they offered to be punished by us for what they did? They did? Why? Asked Marshall. Because they thought they were responsible or your death, said Misty. They submitted judgment to us. We could have done anything to them, but we chose to forgive them. Just one look into their eyes, and we could tell they would have taken everything back that they said about you. Marshall didn't know what to say, he just sighed and nodded. I see.
Dere alle regret it? Said much.
After a long talk and a hug session with his parents, Marshall called for Ryder and his dad. Katie decided to stay behind, seeing as this was a family thing and she was only here for support. When Marshall saw his owner's face to face for the first time in days, he jumped a bed and into his arms, laughing and licking him. Ryder, with tears on his, laughed as he hugged his fire pup harder than he ever could. Ryder's father smiled and scratched the Dalmatian's ear. Good to see you're among the living, Marshall. Thanks, Professor, said Marshall before he turned to Ryder and whimpered. I'm sorry. I wasn't a good pup. What do you mean, Marshall? Asked Ryder. I ran away and worried everyone. Even worse, I made you all think I was dead. I'm so sorry. Marshall jumped off Ryder's arms and back towards the bed, his back facing his owner. If you don't want me anymore, for what I did. I understand. A surprise hug was the answer as Ryder whispered, Don't ever say that, Marshall. You're one of my pups. If anything, this is my entire fault. I'm responsible for you and I failed. I'm so sorry. Ryder, it's not your fault, shouted Marshall, turning around and shaking his head. It's mine. I ran away. But I should have stopped you or known what the other pups did, said Ryder. I didn't tell anyone. I should have gone to talk to you. Enough, shouted Ryder's dad as he got their attention. The truth is there is a lot to be blamed for, but there is no point in thinking about it as it's all in the past. He put his hand on both pup and owner and smiled at them. You two found each other and you've learned from your mistakes. That's the most important part. He turned to his son. Ryder, did you not scold the pups for their actions and organize the best rescue you could to find Marshall? No. Never once giving up until it seemed all was lost? You did your best to rescue Marshall and showed how much you cared for him. But most importantly, you kept calm when the situation called for it. And don't say you could have prevented this, your pups should have known better than to do what they did. And I have a feeling they know better now, thanks to this experience. He then turned to Marshall. Marshall, what you did was foolish, but we understand you were hurt. But never think that there isn't someone out there who loves you. You are family to me and Ryder, and he'll always be there for you. And I know you may be thinking the pup betrayed you, but friends fight all the time. They care about you. Did you know that Chase and Sky fought a bear together because they believed it killed you? Wait, that bear? The one that hurt me? Asked Marshall, jaw-dropping. Yup. Chase and Sky ignored my orders to come home cause of the storm and continued to look for you. They fought that bear and won, for you. Marshall just sat there, stunned beyond all reason. His friends. They fought for him. They almost died for him. He closed his eyes and nodded. Ryder, I think I need to talk to the pups. One by one, they all came in. Marshall sat there on the bed, doing his best to keep calm and not lash out in anger or hug his friends in tears. He saw the nervous and guilty looks they were giving him, but he had to make sure. For a long time, there was no talking. Finally, Chase stepped forward. "Marshall, we'd dash." "Stop," ordered Marshall, holding out his paw. Chase obeyed and stood down. Marshall closed his eyes. "Before we talk. Before you tell me how sorry you are. Before you do anything. Let me get something out of the way." Marshall took a deep breath and, for the first time in his entire life, spoke in anger. "You betrayed me." The five winced, but continued to stand as Marshall let out everything he had been holding in for so long. "How could you say all those mean things to me? After everything we'd been through? I trusted you. I loved you all. I thought of you as family, and you stabbed me in the back. Yes, I make mistakes. Yes, I am a klutz. But at least I don't tell my friends they are annoyances or worthless." He growled, showing his teeth as he got up and stood before the whimpering pups, who were already tearing up. "I would do anything for you five. Anything. Especially you, Chase," shouted Marshall, glaring at the police pup. "I was there when your dad died. I was there for you all the way. You were my brother. And yet you yelled at me like I was some kind of criminal." He barked in anger. "I ran away because I felt that I wasn't needed by any of you, and I almost died doing so. Yeah, running away was stupid, but so was bullying me." Marshall continued to huff and puff, but there was also something else he was doing that caught the eyes of the pups. He was crying. Tears leaked down from his eyes as he lowered his head, muttering, "But I can't hate you. Any of you. Every time I try, I just think about all the fun times we have had together growing up. All the missions we did, and the lives we helped. I think about how much we've grown close, and I want to believe that feeling is still there. I want to still love you five, even though you hurt me." Their ears perked as Marshall continued, I heard everything of what you pups did when I left. I want to know, right now from each of you, why did you do that? Why go through a storm and fight a bear just to bring me home? You made it clear you didn't think I was fit for Paw Patrol anyway." Rubble was the first to answer. "Because you're our buddy." They all glanced at him. "What we did, it was stupid. Apollo was just a TV show, and we shouldn't have said those things to you, Marshall. It was wrong. We were wrong, and when we realized what we did." Rubble sniffed as he began to tear up. "When we thought we lost you, it felt like nothing we would ever do would make up for our mistake. That nothing would ever be happy again." "Rubble's right," said Rocky, lowering his head. "We're ashamed of what we did. There's nothing wrong with being clumsy, we've lived with it for so long and we love you for being you. When I thought you were dead, Marshall, I prayed that you were still alive. I offered anything to see you again, even drowning myself in water if it meant having you back." Rocky walked over and gently licked Marshall's cheek. "Do you remember when you took care of me when the others dealt with those bullies? You stood by me, and I let you down. I promise that will never happen again." Before Marshall could answer, he was tackled by a crying Zuma, much to everyone's surprise. The sobbing chocolate Labrador held him tight and didn't dare let go. "Please tell me it's real. Please tell me that you're still alive." Marshall's expression softened as he gently rubbed Zuma's head. "Yeah, Zuma. I'm here." "Wah-ah," cried Zuma, hugging tighter. "When I hod. I wanted you. Marshall." Marshall didn't say anything, he just hugged his friend and nuzzled him. "I'm alive, Zuma. You don't have to worry." I don't care if you forgive us or not. I mean, I would like it, but..." He rubbed his eyes and gave Marshall a warm smile. "Knowing you're alive is enough for me, big bro." "Zuma. Marshall began to tear up and hug the little pup. "I'm sorry I worried you." "Marshall." "I'm so sorry," whispered Sky as she got onto his bed and whimpered. "I acted just like those bullies from my past. When it hit me what I did, I just wanted to sink into the earth in shame." She started to tear up. "I saw your fire truck, your blood at the bear's cave. I thought I lost one of my best friends, and it was all my fault. If I stood up for you, any of us, this didn't have to happen. It's all our fault. You shouldn't even be injured in the first place, you should have been with us at the lookout." Turning away, she lowered her head. I don't deserve your forgiveness." "Sky," whispered Marshall, as he closed his eyes and thought about his long journey. Did you and Chase really fight that bear, for me?" "Fought and killed," whimpered Sky, turning green. I never wanted to, but I'd fight 100 bears for you, Marshall." A real smile made it to Marshall's lips as he then turned to Chase, who stood there as still as a statue. Everyone waited with awaited breath as Marshall got up and jumped down, walking over to the police dog. The two eyed each other, neither moving or saying anything. The four nervously looked at each other with concern before Chase took a deep breath. "This is for running away and nearly getting killed." "Pow!" The four other pups gasped as Chase's paw smacked into Marshall's face, knocking him back. Chase sighed and said, "Your turn." Marshall's stunned face slowly transformed into a growl as he charged at Chase, knocking him over. The two pups barked and began to rough each other up, biting and slamming their paws against each other. Chase kicked Marshall out of him before ramming him into the wall. Marshall yipped in pain before using his rear leg to kick Chase in the gut and throw him off. "Marshall!" "Chase!" "Stop it!" shouted Sky. "What the heck do you guys think you're doing?" shouted Rubble. The two pups ignored their friends and Chase took off, Marshall running right after him with an angry bark. They rushed out of the cottage and into the snowy fields outside, much to the shock of the rest of the gang. Marshall finally tackled Chase as he bit his tail as hard as he could, making the police dog howl. The audience as shocked by this as the pups ran out and Sky shouted, "Ryder! Make them stop!" Ryder was about to, but his father stopped him and shook his head. "They need this." "Marshall!" cried out Misty, turning to her husband. "Blaze, stop them!" "No," he answered much to her shock. He stared at the fight with knowing eyes. This is between them, as brothers. Like it was with me and Trigger." Chase had taken some snow and thrown it in Marshall's face before smacking him a few more times with his paw before setting him up in a chokehold. Marshall gasped for air as he felt Chase's front legs wrapped around his neck. With all his strength, Marshall elbowed Chase in the cut and bit his neck, dragging him down as he continued his attack. The group watched in horror, except for Blaze and the professor, as both dogs continued to tear each other apart. Even to the point of bleeding. After a long period of trying to get on top, the two broke away from each other and started hitting each other with their paws again. One would make contact, while the other countered with a blow of their own. At first it seemed like this would never end, but slowly they began to slow down. And besides the grunting, there was crying. The audience's eyes widened as they saw both Marshall and Chase crying as they continued to hit each other, the force of their blows getting weaker and weaker with each moment. Finally, neither could lift their paws against each other. For a whole minute they stared at each other, and then hugged. Nuzzling each other, the two brothers cried side by side as they whimpered, not from the pain from their fight, but the pain being released from their hearts. Naturally, there were some confused pups and humans. "I don't get it," said Everest, shaking her head. "They were ready to kill each other and now they're hugging each other like nothing has changed." "Why?" "Because they're brothers," answered Blaze, smiling at the scene before him. "True brothers will always love each other, even in the worst of times." Sometimes you want to hug them, sometimes you want to punch them. All the fighting was their way of talking, to saying what need to be said. All the emotion in each blow, and now that it's all used up, all that anger and regret, they can heal. Blaze sighed as a nostalgic look in his eyes made him water. Trigger and I did it all the time. Those two, they're just like us. So, he forgives Chase? Asked Rocky. He was going to forgive you all no matter what, said Blaze, laughing. That's just how Marshall is. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, said Chase. I love you, Marshall, always. I love you too, Chase, said Marshall, breaking the hug and smiling. Sorry, I almost broke the promise. Forget the promise, Marshall, said Chase, as he smiled back. Promise me that if I ever do something as stupid as call you an annoyance again, you'll punch me? Promise, whispered Marshall as he hugged him again. I forgive you. All of you. Thank you, whispered Chase before grinning. You know I went easy on you, right? Yeah, big softy, whispered Marshall before he sniffed the air and his eyes widened. Breaking the hug, he raised his eyebrow and stared at Chase with a suspicious smirk. Why do I smell sky scent on you? Close to your mouth? A blush appeared on Chase's face. Ugh, no reason? Oh my gosh, you two kissed, didn't ya? Shouted Marshall, earning everybody's attention before they all turned their attention towards Sky, who was just as red as Chase. And no. I didn't kiss her yet, shouted Chase, eyes widening upon realizing what he said. I mean. Marshall was now laughing hysterically as he laid on his back, kicking in the air. The others soon joined him except for Sky, who was shaking her head. 3 months later. Said Katie as she checked Marshall's side again, the rest of the pups and Ryder waiting in the medical room with them in anticipation. Smiling, Katie nodded, yup. He's good to go. The pups cheered with excitement as Marshall pumped his paw in the air. Yes. This pup's back in the game. Great to have you officially back, Marshall, said Ryder, scratching Marshall's ear much to his pleasure. Yeah, although it was funny seeing all us take turns in your uniform, replied Sky. I don't know, I think you looked kinda of cute in it, replied a grinning Chase, which earned him a peck on the cheek from his girlfriend. Ugh, get a room, muttered Zuma, rolling his eyes. 3 months as a couple, and you two can't keep your paws off each other. What can I say? I can't get enough of her, said Chase, nuzzling Sky affectionately. A beep on Ryder's pup pad alerted everyone of a possible rescue mission as the owner opened the channel. Hello, what's up? Ryder. We got a gas leak in my store. Alex and I are already outside safe, but we need to stop it as soon as possible. Can you help? No problem, Mr. Porter, said Ryder as he raised his arm. No job is too big, no pup is too small. He turned to his pup team and smiled. Paw Patrol. To the lookout. Let's go, the 6 shouted as they made their way to the elevator. Marshall jumped from his bed and shouted, "Wait for me." Just as he exited, his paw got caught in a play rope and tripped. Whoa. Whoa. He bounced off a cushion, slammed into a wall, and started to roll towards the elevator. Heads up. Uh-oh, said the pups before they were bowled over by Marshall and ended up in a tangle. Blushing, Marshall whispered, "Sorry, pups. Guess this is proof that I'm all better, huh?" The 6 laughed as the elevator rose. Yup. Things were all better again.
So Leute, das war jetzt für der Ende von Mushroom Missing Geschichte. Hoffe, ihr habt euch den Spaß gemacht. Wenn es euch Spaß gemacht hat, abonniert meinen Kanal und aktiviert euch Glück. Und ich gebe noch ein Big Shoutout an mein Team, dass sie für diese Zeit mich die ganze Zeit geholfen haben, dass wir endlich geschafft haben, die Mushroom Missing Geschichte fertig gemacht haben. Wir haben etwa 13 bis 15 Tage gebraucht, um es plötzlich fertig zu machen, Leute. Das war's die Geschichte gewesen von Mushroom Missing. Wenn ihr wir werden mehr Updates geben, wenn dann eine neue Geschichte kommt mit den PAW Patrol Geschichten. Und für das, Leute, ich und mein Team haben wir geplant, dass ich bald wieder live kommen, aber nicht auf PC, sondern auf PS4. Und ja, Leute, wir sehen uns später. Bis gleich.